My name is Fran, and for our time together here, I'm going to introduce you to the enchanting city of Barcelona, Spain. You're looking at a picture of the harbor from the sea. The coastline is 4.5 miles long. Notice the mountains and notice the land. It slopes gently down to the sea. Here's another view of the city from land. And you can see in the distance those great cruise ships, and that's a very fancy modern hotel, and one of the beautiful beaches. There are about 9 beautiful beaches here in Barcelona. You are in the kingdom, technically the kingdom, of Spain, and as you can see, the capital, Madrid, is pretty much in the center of the country. But if you look to the top right-hand corner, that is the location of Barcelona, only 60 miles from the French border, which on occasion in its 2,000-year history has been pretty important. The mountains separate Spain from France. As far as the people who live here goes, this is the most important map I'm showing you. It is a map of the 14 autonomous regions of Spain. And in the top right-hand corner northeast, Catalunya. Sometimes we say Catalan. I think Catalunya is easier to pronounce, especially if you're not from Barcelona. So we're going to stick with Catalunya. Barcelona is the capital of Catalunya. I'm going to go into the history just a little bit. I think it's important to understand these are a determined, spirited, committed people and very independent. For example, the flag of Spain here is intentionally small. Madrid, in the capital, refers to Barcelona as the second city. I'm here to tell you no one you see on the streets or in their apartments believes that for a minute. The largest flag is on purpose. That is the flag of the autonomous region of Catalonia. This is the flag you see flying more than anything else. Sometimes you will see it flying with the flag of the city, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. And the flag on the right bottom corner is the flag that many people hold dear. For many people who live here, 1.7 million, being autonomous is not enough. They want independence. So, for example, if you're walking in one of the neighborhoods and you see you are not in Spain, you are in Catalunya, they think they're a separate country. They're about 68% Catholic. The official languages are 2 here. First, Catalonian, and 2, Spanish. They are not variations of each other. They are very different languages. The Roman reaction to seeing this place for the first time was probably the one you had. What a beautiful harbor. And so in the year 200 BC, they settled here. And they established an agricultural outpost, grew grapes, made wine, shipped it out. They also set this up as a retirement community for their soldiers who had grown old. And most importantly, they brought the Latin language. The Catalan language is derived from Latin. The whole history of Catalonia is like an accordion. Stretch out the independence, rein them in. Whether Madrid, the central capital, was doing it, or invaders were doing it, back and forth. And what the Catalonians learn in school and believe in their heart, that they do so much better when they're independent. The 20th century was disastrous for their independence. In the late 1800s, Catalonia was thriving as a port. There were a lot of wealthy merchants, perhaps too many, because the excesses of prosperity set in. The factories they built were unsafe. Workers had low wages. They could only afford to live in slums. This was happening in other places around Spain. And from 1933 to 1936, there was a horrible civil war. What emerged from that civil war was a dictator named Francisco Franco, who hated Catalonia. Why? They had sided with the other side. People lost their lives, people were imprisoned, their property was taken, their property was destroyed, and thousands went into exile. The happiest day for them was 1975. In 1975, when Francisco Franco died. And the best year for them after 75 was 1992. They started on their upward swing. King Juan Carlos had taken over from Franco. He gave everybody their autonomy back. And the Catalonians put their head down and worked hard. The world recognized them as a global city for the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. And so Catalonia says to Madrid, no, we are not the second city. We are number one in art and culture and commerce and geography and soccer. The political and economic history of Barcelona and Catalonia is written all over its buildings. Barcelona is world known for its take on what was called the modernist movement. In the middle to late 1800s, people got tired of Victorian. Too fancy, too complicated. Let's simplify. Let's go back to nature. Let's use curves in our architecture. Let it be practical and pretty. The best personification of Barcelona's adaptation of modernism after Art Nouveau came into vogue in Europe is a man by the name of Antonio Gaudi. I think it's important for you to know his story. He was born in 1856 in rural Catalonia. Not too many people, but they were at the coast, among the olive trees and the almond trees. He was the youngest of 5 children, and the only one in his family that made it to adulthood. His father was a metal worker, making cauldrons, primarily. And, as was the custom of the time, Antonio's job was to take over from his father. He worked with his father, he learned about metal work, but he left the family business very quickly. For him, architecture was not a profession. It was a calling. And so he studied architecture. Now, as a child, he was fascinated with the structure of plants. He loved animals and insects and fish and geology. He believed that nature was an open book and that all of us should read it. He also believed, as an architect, that there was nothing that any architect could imagine that wasn't already in nature. When he was in his 30s, he had a very tragic experience of the heart. He was expected to carry the family bloodline, and there were 2 women who each refused his proposals of marriage. It changed everything for him. He sold everything he had. A wealthy patron had a great idea for a cathedral, hired him as a designer, and he spent the rest of his life driven to honor the glory of God through the building you're looking at. This is the number 1 attraction that people come to see in Barcelona. The name of the church, Holy Family. In Catalan, Sagrada Familia. And he designed it when he was 31. He knew he would never finish it in his lifetime. So as he labored on the church, he also labored with the workmen to train someone to take his place. Take a look closely This is his model. The front of the church is not done. A lot of the church isn't done right now. But a lot is, some that he worked on. The tallest spire you're looking at is to Jesus. It's 156 feet high. You can't see the next highest. That's to Mary. But what you can see on three sides are the 4 pillars. 12 pillars, 12 apostles. And in the middle there are 4 pillars. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is a model of the cathedral when he died. He died in his 70s very tragically. He had moved into the church office to devote his full energy to the church. He was deep in thought, went out for an evening walk, crossed the street, was hit by a tram, and died 2 days later. And then the big debate. Who's going to finish this? How much money is it going to cost? Somebody had an idea to why don't we just put a big piece of glass, a glass dome over the church, leave it to him as a memorial. Those people lost. The building continued. And this is a close-up of the Nativity. Remember Nativity, Passion, Resurrection, or Glory of God. Those were the 3 entrances. And he finished this one before he died. And if you look up toward the towers, you see the ultimate event, which was the birth of Jesus. And I just want, there is no way I can even begin to convey in any slide presentation the details in this church. But I want to give you enough to make you curious, because it's certainly worth seeing, at least from the outside. Look at the detail of the birth of Jesus. Look at that gentleness in the animals surrounding him. Look at the Holy Family getting ready to flee to Egypt. Again, the animals. These are the shepherds adoring Jesus at his birth. And the largest of the shepherds in the middle has a lamb on his shoulder, very symbolic of the Lamb of God. And you see the middle shepherd is taller than the rest, and he is underneath some of the 30 native plants from both the Holy Land and from Catalonia that Gaudi used for this section. This is the Passion facade. This is what was built by Joseph Surabach, an architect who took over after Gaudi died. The scenes from the Passion start actually even below this side. And as we move from the Passion to the Crucifixion, it zigzags up the entire wall. If you look below the cross, you see the face of Christ in Veronica's hands as she wiped the face of Jesus. If you look above and see Jesus on the cross, his head is down. He has died. But it looks like there's a book on his head, because there is. It is symbolic of the Word of God. Now move your eyes to the left, and I'll be mentioning dragons throughout my presentation. This is St. George. There are 2 patron saints of Barcelona. And symbolically, Barcelonians have slayed many dragons. But Gaudi's design gave Prince George a shout out, and so he is there. Now let's look at a couple of the close-ups. Here is Christ obviously being exhausted from the abuse, and next to him on the right is Herod. Next to him on the right is Pontius Pilate. He's washing his hands. Jesus is about to begin the way of the cross. This is a very interesting one. There are 3 women in the background. Looking back of the woman on the left is a rooster. That rooster crowed 3 times, predicting that St. Peter would deny Christ. And there in the foreground is a very, very remorseful St. Peter. This is the long view of the towers, and it's here, if you will notice, no surface uncovered. Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. Holy, holy, holy. And in the middle is a preview of things to come. Jesus starts his ascent into heaven as they begin to move on to building the third section. Here he is. And I put this in because of his love of nature, and to remind you that you are going to a construction site when you visit this church. You won't see these easily because they're on top of the nave. His obsession with the natural and modernist art. Let's go inside. What you're looking at is the altar. And you're also getting a view of some of the natural materials that he used for the columns. There are 56 columns in this church. Half of them are 72 feet high, and half of them are 36 feet high. He was inspired by nothing more than cypress trees. You're starting to see the different materials. The granite that he used for some, the dark basalt, and the brown clay. Here are two other pictures. The one on the left is from the floor. The one on the right, again, harkens back to nature. The blue stained glass is the sky. The green stained glass is the trees. And of course you've got the flowers on the bottom. And this is my favorite inside picture. Antonio Gaudi got his rainforest. Just a gentle dappling of the sun in a very simple, elegant space. The year is 2010. Pope Benedict comes here to consecrate this church as a minor basilica. There's no bishop here. And he is heard to remark, this church is inside out. Because all the fancy, all the embellishments are on the outside, and this elegant simplicity is inside. I want to just go through to work with some dimensions of genius of Gaudi by showing you some of his works, some that he even finished. This one is the Vincennes house. He violated his major rule. It was his first commission. It only took him 2 years. And his first rule is no right angles in nature, no right angles in my building. He learned from that. He also used extensively broken pieces of ceramic, which were his trademark. We'll see more of them as I show you a couple of other things. But if you look up to the top, you see the checkerboard, the ceramic checkerboard. And it's certainly no coincidence that the man who commissioned this house owned a ceramics factory. And here I'm going to show you his masterpiece, Casa Batlló. This happens to be one of the most interesting architectural streets in all of Barcelona. The one with the chimney and the little embellishment, that is his house. The one with the sharp lines to the left is a colleague. So even within Barcelona, with its different take on modernism, Gaudi stood out. The owner said, tear down the house and build me a new one. He said, no, we don't have to do that. I'm going to redo your interior and redo your facade. And here is a close-up of that roof. Look at the scaly skin. There is St. George, again, in a very different form. Look at the balcony. They look to me like shark's teeth. They jut out into the street. I don't know what they look like to you. This is a private home, and so your only view, if you choose to walk this wonderful neighborhood, if you're interested in architecture, will be the outside. This is classic Gaudi biting off more than he could possibly chew. Peter Millar was a very, well, he was wealthy. He married a woman richer than he was. But together, they had a mission. Let's hire Gaudi, tell him he has to outdo Batlló House, and build us the finest apartment building on the block. Well, it opened to mixed results, to say the least. You see all those windows? There's no right angles in that building all around. It's one of the advantages of using concrete for construction. It's a little more bendable. There was a cartoon in the local paper that had an airplane flying out of every one of those rooms. And on top, in front of the roof, it said garage. Then there was the tenant who bought a wonderful apartment with a big piano. She called Mr. Gaudi and said, "Where do I put my piano?" To which he responded, "Buy a violin." So another architectural critic said, "This is the kind of building you would never have a dog for a pet. You need a snake." The roof was the pièce de résistance. You cannot see it from here. You can't see it from the street. You can, however, buy a ticket to see the lobby and then take the elevator to see the roof. But just imagine for a minute. You live in that neighborhood. You've got tons of money. And the guy in the neighborhood has an architect that is building what you think is an ark anyway. It's too big, too unusual from what you can see. And they take the scaffolding off in 1910 to reveal the roof. And you have a perfect view of it from your bedroom. What you're looking at up close is his chimneys, but this really got to people. These are the vents that he built. As a matter of fact, the soldiers standing behind Pontius Pilate as he washes his hands are reminiscent of that. Their eyes are little because they're wearing their suits. He exceeded the height restrictions and got in trouble with the city, and certainly made no friends from this building. But it is quite a sight. You decide. Finally, his wealthiest patron, Joseph Guel, bought a 30-acre park. He decided he wanted to build what, in essence, was a 60-home gated community on a hill overlooking the ocean. And so he hired Gaudi. It was 1900 when he started. 1914 he had to stop. They were on the eve of World War I. It never got rolling again. And so the city received it in Guel's will and turned it back into a park. I have had people tell me of everything they've seen in Barcelona. This was their favorite. It's really a fairyland. And I'm just going to give you a little taste of what you can see. The park is free. No reservations required. A cab ride will get you there. And it's a nice way to enjoy a day outside. This is the entrance. Those buildings, they're two minor buildings. Today, one is a visitor center, and the other is a minor museum. But if you go all the way up there, you want to stay outside. Here are his broken pieces of ceramic, creating a border for the walkway entrance into the park. This is a terrace that gives you the absolute best view of Barcelona without taking an elevator. And he had a very creative idea for seating. He interviewed the workers, trying to get their backs to be comfortable with straight back. Benches with broken tiles. And this is what he ended up with. There are 3 fountains climbing the stairs to this terrace. St. George, maybe you've heard of them. This is a very interesting thing. Look at the palm trees. And he builds bird nests. But he builds the bird nests underneath the trees to mirror all the pine trees growing. And here is up close some of those broken tiles. Individually, they're worthless, but they have been put together in a beautiful, beautiful design. I'm going to move now into the neighborhoods by the water. We have 3 neighborhoods on the 30 acres that Rome settled and surrounded. the city itself with a wall that they built. The first one is Las Rambla, or as a nickname, Rambla. This is the most entertaining and theatrical walk in Spain. It's actually 5 streets joined together. The word Rambla in Arabic means stream. So built over the stream that only ran in heavy rain is a walkway. I'm hoping this local map of the neighborhoods is going to empower you to get off the ship and take a walk. The small pink section on the water is the old city, where the Romans built the wall, around 30 acres, and lived there for so long. It's divided into 3 neighborhoods, and Las Ramblas is the first. This is the square. It's at the top of the slope. Always better on a hot day, go up and walk down. Here's a close-up view of what people do here. Locals go to see and be seen, to see what's going on, to see who's working. They don't usually go to eat. More about that later. But look in the background of the fountain, and you see what I mean about beautiful architecture all over the city with no particular historical significance. And this is the walkway. No strollers, no bikes, just people having fun. You never know who you're going to run into. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there's an orange bucket. And he will come to life. Michael Jackson will come to life for very little money. This is iconic. When aqueducts were bringing water into the city, the Canaletti's fountain brought it. That was the end of the line. Now, for years, water was polluted. Olympics came, they cleaned it up. Now you fill your water bottle there. Actually, the legend is, if you drink the water, you'll come back to Spain. It's also where people meet for rallies and demonstrations. This is soccer fans coming to celebrate a victory. And this soccer stadium is not in the neighborhood, but I thought you'd like to see it. It seats 94,000. This is the European Championship game going on, and there is no seat. So there's a jumbotron by the fountain, and people get to watch the game. We've got any number of flower stands selling artificial and fresh flowers. Again, incidentally, beautiful architecture. Look up, top left, second floor. There's your dragon. Now this dragon's holding an umbrella for a very good reason. The shop on the first level sells umbrellas. Here are some more living statues. The town limits them. You'll only see 12 to 15 on any given day. Some of these creative guys have 2 or 3 outfits, so they work a little more often. Joan Miró, abstract artist, son of Barcelona. This is his mosaic. The public art in this city is awesome. Here's an evening shot of people going home for a performance at an opera house called Le Sur, which rivals the beauty of La Scala in Milan. Take a look. What European city would be complete without a magnificent, huge market, especially in the Mediterranean, with all this great weather to grow things? This market sells anything. Merchants are very proud. Look at the splash of color here. And here are the rules for going into a market. Enjoy the view at the beginning, head right to the end if you want to buy something. That's where the cheaper prices are. Do not eat in Las Ramblas, because the number of tourists brings the quality of the food down. You may eat in here. These merchants have been here for years. Go to the end, sit at the counter, and people watch. Locals and tourists alike love this market. This is where you've walked. You've walked down to the coast. Look at those plane trees. That's Plane. They're pollution resistant, and in the summer they throw a lot of shade. At the bottom of the screen, built for the 1888 World Exposition, is Columbus's monument. And you're not too far from the water at this point. Here is the high view of Columbus. If you are not claustrophobic, take an elevator 7.5-foot square to the top. It's 156 feet, and you'll get a great view of the ocean. Finally, in this neighborhood, hugging the sea, is one of the finest preserved medieval shipyards in all of Europe. It was closed for 2 years for renovation. It's got everything from navigation plans to all kinds of navigation artifacts, to model boats, to regular-sized boats. Here are a couple of those, to magnificent ships. It's worth the walk through the facility to see how they handled all the traffic on the way to becoming the great port that they are. Next neighborhood, right next door, Barry Gotti, Gothic neighborhood, misnomer. It used to be called the Cathedral neighborhood. But basically, if you're going to pick a place in Barcelona to just walk aimlessly, go down the narrow streets, stop, sit on a bench, this is your place. It's also your place if you like Roman ruins. This is a piece of the wall that they got permission to take down in 1850. You see the metal letters that spell out the Romans' name for Barcelona, Barcino. This is what's left of the main gate to enter the walled city. This is a Roman necropolis or cemetery. This is part of one of the greatest museums in Barcelona for archaeology. You get to walk on metal platforms inside and to peek right inside Roman homes, see all kinds of things like an olive pressing machine and other things they relied on for their daily survival. If you just want to see the necropolis, as you can see, it's in a commercial neighborhood. This is what I mean when I talk about those great narrow streets. Just Rome. This is just a church. It is the garden of a small church of Santa Anna. If it's hot, a lot of people walking around, nook and crannies, it's open. Go take some pictures. This is the Cathedral of Barcelona. It has no other name except the square, Le Sur. They can't agree who to name it for. Name it for St. Eulalia, name it for the Virgin Mary. They're still talking about it. It took 160 years to build, as most cathedrals did. It was, in its time, the center of all activity. And the facade, which is Gothic, was not put on and finished together with the spire until 1914. It actually has the reputation for being one of the darkest cathedrals in Europe. This is noontime, and you're still getting shadows. But it's worth a look because it's a good example of Catalan Gothic. There are 24 chapels surrounding the nave. And downstairs, they move the remains of St. Eulalia here, and she's buried in a very, very moving setting. Don't miss the cloister. It's attached to the church. In the Middle Ages, the purpose of a cloister, which was a closed square, was to separate the monks from the serfs. And why you really want to go there is to see the geese. They've been there for over 500 years. Not these particular geese, but their descendants, as it were. This is the most sacred and fun dance of Catalonia. It is called the Sardana. You can, if you are in Barcelona on a Sunday after Mass, the entire church empties out into the square and does the Sardana. They are accompanied by musicians, 11 wood instruments and the bass player in the back. That was the kind of custom that was banned in years of oppression. They could not do the Sardana for Francisco Franco, so they do it with zest now. The final neighborhood is the trendiest, the most residential. And it was the one not paid too much attention to, so they didn't have to tear down a lot to build. It's called El Born or La Ribera. This is an avenue, residential, kind of affluent population, and bicycle, of course, is the vehicle of choice. This is the kind of street you want to walk down because there are such small shops and numerous shops with entrepreneurs who have made what they sell. One-of-a-kind merchandise. great cafes and restaurants because the population demands them. So if that's your thing, this is where you go. Typical example, residences, shop on the bottom. There are no department stores in this neighborhood. Every once in a while you get lucky. This is a clothing flea market right in the middle of the avenue. But usually it's the individual entrepreneur who really is just wanting you to ask him or her about what they have made. This church is right by the water. And by the way, each of these three neighborhoods, I've started at the top, gently walked down the hill, and we always end up at the sea. This church, translated, is Our Lady of the Sea. There are some very unique features about this church. Number one, it was built by volunteers. Number two, it received no money from the city, the state, or anybody else. Self-funded to this day. It is probably the church with the best example of Catalan Gothic. This is the front facade, a relief of Jesus, and this is the hero. This is a porter. This is a guy who walked up the hill to Montjuic, to the quarry, picked a stone, brought it back on his back, chiseled it a little, and set it in place. It only took 60 years to build this cathedral. And this was the area during the Middle Ages when this was built, when all the guilds had their offices. So there were plenty of volunteers. Look at the interior. Look at the elegant simplicity. If you want to go into the church for a very nice religious experience, this is your church. And ironically, it was Francisco Franco who was responsible for the simplicity of this church. It used to be embellished with a lot of fancy Baroque stuff. That was burned during the Civil War. But what was left is just beautiful. It was the custom in the 15th century to leave a boat by the altar to ask for protection. And as you can see, there's a boat still there. There's a Barcelona cultural center that they formed when they found ruins below a market. Maybe you want to go there. That is open in public. This is another beautiful building inside. This is the Palace of Music. Another entertainment venue. I'm showing you this because it is the finest example of a modernist interior in all of Barcelona. Now I'm showing you one of the most popular museums, Pablo Picasso's museum. The white section of the building is the palace. That was the beginning of the museum. It has 4 adjacent buildings. Picasso, born in Malaga, moved to Barcelona when he was 14. His father was an art teacher. You will not find his blockbuster Cubist paintings here. What you will find is the beginning of his genius, starting with his blue period. The sad period was also a sad period in history. As Barcelona grew more prosperous, he moved to his rose period. This museum is so popular, you're going to need a reservation. So tickets in advance are recommended. And if you just don't want to do architecture, you want to see edible architecture, this is where you go. This is the Chocolate Museum. Recognize the street for the 2 houses, Casa Batlló and the other modernist home. And this is really a very young version of Sagrada. There's only 4 towers. So this was while Gaudi was still alive. Before we leave this area, let's go to the waterfront. A lot of that 200 million destroyed all the ugly warehouses and created these vistas, the activity center. This one has shopping centers, and it has several movie places. And this is also across from what was the Olympic Village for the athletes in 1992. This is, again, one of the beautiful beaches. They have an aquarium, several sharks and hundreds of fish. Great for the kids. 2 American artists were commissioned for the Olympics to create some art. This is Barcelona Head. This is the very famous abstract artist Roy Lichtenstein. And this is the outrageous Frank Gehry. Now, when I first saw this, I thought it was the whale. He only calls it the fish. Let's do some more Olympics. Just to remind you, we're leaving now the old city, the pink part. The bottom left-hand space, Montjuic. It looks like Montjuic, but that's not how you say it. And it is the hill overlooking the city. It is the biggest green space. Barcelona had great foresight. They could have built high-priced housing overlooking the ocean, and they never did. So when the Olympics came, they always had a spot to build. This is the first Olympics done here. 1929, you go to the Olympics, you drive around the traffic circle, Plaza España, you drive through those Venetian towers, you drive up to that palace, and that is where the main indoor events were in 1992. You drove along many, many fountains. The theme of that Olympics was there's more to electricity than a light bulb. So here you have a magic fountain, which still exists, timed to music, an eruption in 50 different combinations. You can go up virtually any week, 2 or 3 nights a week. The show is on. Now, the Olympics for 1992 had to go a little bit upward. So here we are. Looks like a fancy building. It is the entrance to the Olympic Stadium. Here is the stadium. It holds 65,000 people, and it's a complex. It's the major complex, beginning and opening and ending ceremonies, rather, at the stadium. And then to the left, Palais Jordi for St. George. 2 of the major events were the volleyball finals and the handball finals. In fact, there were 45 venues in the greater Barcelona area. So there were some track events here. The communication satellite is here. The communication tower is here. And also the museum is here. Also here is the gift to the city of Barcelona from Joan Miró. This is his museum. And I love this picture because you get a view of the city from the hill that is Montjuic. There are over 11,000 items in this museum, all given to the city of Barcelona as a gift from Miró. His heart was in Barcelona, though he lived in Mallorca and Paris for most of his life. There are also paintings of his contemporaries, about 240 paintings in all. Matisse and Calder the sculptor are well represented. This is classic Miró. He worked in the primary colors. This is called The Women and the Bird. This is called a sculpture on the back of the museum. And this is the recycled main event palace from 1929. It is the Museum of Catalan Art. Its specialty is Romanesque frescoes. It went into the churches of Barcelona in the 1930s, took the altar pieces and the frescoes, painstakingly restored them, and it's a world-class collection. They also have Gothic and Renaissance. Barcelona, of any city in the world, gets trade fairs, exhibitions, and Olympics right. The $200 million that they spent for housing for athletes, which are wonderful apartments, to clean up the coast, to create more beaches, and to create this beautiful museum. 5 years later, they moved in after the Olympics were over, is a testament to their ingenuity and their foresight. And if you don't want to do any of that, but you just want to poke around on Montjuic, or you want a great view, take the tram. One of the stops is not too far from your cruise ship. Finally, churro, fluted dough, and, hard to believe, hot chocolate with the consistency of pudding. The author James Michener wrote a book called Iberia, and he said very simply, all you need to know about the courage of the people who live in Barcelona is this is what they have for breakfast. You dip the churro with a bib in the hot chocolate. There you go. And don't forget, at Cataletti's, drink the water, because no matter what you see tomorrow, you will want to come back to Barcelona. Thank you, and I'll be available for questions for a few minutes.